Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Australian heavyweight champion Justis Huni will return to the ring in May. He will feature on the undercard of Myris Bradis versus Jai Opetaia, which is going to be on Australia's Gold Coast. So the opponent for Justis Huni, who's been out of the ring it will be almost a year by the time he gets back in the ring, he'll be facing Kiki Leutele from New Zealand. That's where I'm from. So we'll get to Kiki Leutele in a moment, but you can see here, promo poster, this is for the Bradis and Opetaia fight for the IBF title. Justis Huni at an event, and this is Opetaia on the left here, Huni on the right. Kiki Leutele, he's the one here on screen. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's good to see that Justis Huni is going to be back, because injury and then having COVID have prevented him from being in the ring. Obviously well documented that injury derailed his Olympic dream in 2021. They pushed it a little bit too hard, too fast, too many fights in quick succession, 3 over the course of a few months, culminating in that fight with Paul Gallen. Injured his hand again in that fight. So there are questions obviously going forward. Justis Huni, young heavyweight, one of the best rising prospects in the heavyweight division, had hand trouble. Also, there was that weird concussion that they sort of emerged after the sort of sparring footage, and here is that footage on screen where he was knocked down, and it was attributed that him getting or taking that punch the way that he did, some prior wrestling accident where effectively he'd been dropped on his head on concrete. So make of that what you will. So a couple of question marks about the durability going forward, but what is undeniable is the skills and the talent. Justis Huni is one of the best pure boxers with his skills and speed. Maybe the power is not, that one punch concussive knockout power, but there are some parallels to the early Joseph Parker, someone who's quick, fast. I think Huni actually, at that stage of his career, has better footwork. I think the technique is a bit better as well, but he is a guy who was on the rise and been out, or by the time he gets in the ring, out of the ring for almost a year. But this opponent, Kiki Leutele, so pictured here, this is his fight against Dempsey McKean, and Kiki Leutele, he's sort of third or fourth in the New Zealand sort of heavyweight standards. And just to sort of illustrate that, so here on BoxRec, and just to note, Junior Fa is not listed on BoxRec at the moment because he's been inactive. He hasn't fought since the Joseph Parker fight, and he was actually in line potentially to be an opponent for Justis Huni. We'll talk about that in a moment. But of Kiki Leutele, for people who are not familiar with him, just to sort of try to set the scene about the level of opponent. So you've got Joseph Parker, Junior Fa, that's generally regarded the 1-2, Hemia Hill, sort of, I think, a clear third, and then you have Kiki Leutele. And he's no easy beat, and if we talk about that fight with Dempsey McKean, a lot of people thought that Kiki Leutele was really hard done by the judges, who scored it relatively wide to Dempsey McKean, where arguably he had a lot more success than he was credited with. And he was the one that did sort of buzz McKean at one point. It was a very tough fight for Dempsey McKean. So this is no walkover, but it is, I think, a slight step back from what a Junior Fa fight would have been. So there was a lot of talk towards the end of 2021 that Fa and Huni were going to be fighting. There was a card that they were targeting, I think it was up in the northern hemisphere of Australia, but ultimately we didn't get that fight. And I think from what I could sort of glean from the situation is Junior Fa's camp, maybe similar to the Joseph Parker negotiations, wanted big money. And coming off a loss, maybe more money than was willing to be paid by Justis Huni and his promoter, all that sort of stuff. And clearly it sort of fell apart. Junior Fa thought it was at the verge of being made. He sort of had said in the video, like, there's been a lot of talks underway. I thought it was going to be made. I thought he'd be fighting this guy, and just sort of went quiet. I think it's probably because the financial demands were maybe a bit too rich. But Justis Huni they had scheduled a fight after 6 months of him sort of out of the ring, had scheduled a fight for early this year for Joe Goodall. But that fight never went ahead. And actually, I'll just try to on Dean Lonergan's page here. So it never went ahead because Justis Huni got COVID. So Joe Goodall, Justis Huni would have been for the Australian heavyweight title. Goodall has been training in Las Vegas with Kevin Barry. And interestingly, it says that it was postponed till June the 1st. So potentially this could still be in play for June the 1st. But given that this fight's going to be in May, perhaps something else has happened and this has now fallen by the wayside. The announcements recently have overtaken events. But it wouldn't surprise me at some point if that fight again gets made, because it's a good sort of prospect level fight for Justis Huni on the way up. And Goodall himself, an undefeated prospect. But I think Justis Huni is sort of in a different sort of arc to Goodall. We may see some improvements for Goodall training in Las Vegas under Kevin Barry, getting good sparring in recent months with the likes of Jared Anderson. But Justis Huni is by far and away, in my view, one of the best heavyweight prospects that we've got out here right now. He's in that league with Bakadir Jalalov, Jared Anderson, and we need to see more, but Richard Torres probably could slot into that group as well. And I'm not talking about the sort of the heavyweight prospects that have been bouncing around for 5 or 6 years. You know, come on, after 5 years, are you really a prospect anymore? If you're not tested, well, that's up to your promoter, and it's a failure in the promotion and the matchmaking. But Huni is a talent, and Kiki Leutele is tough, durable. It's going to be interesting. I think this could be similar to some of those fights like Whainga or Pilu, where there'll be resistance. It'll be quite hard to initially break him down. But one thing that Kiki Leutele has been found out to be vulnerable to, and this is over a few fights, is the uppercut. So he did actually have a fight, and I'll just jump into his record. Julius Long. So this was back in, was it 2019, I want to say? Yes, it was. August 2019. Ended up being a draw, and that was because Kiki Leutele was dropped twice by Julius Long uppercuts in that fight. He was bossing that fight, then all of a sudden out of nowhere he was on the canvas. And then again, was dropped with the exact same shot about a round or so later. So it is a vulnerability, and, you know, McKean hit him with a few as well. But in that Dempsey-McKean fight, Kiki Leutele sort of showed, you know, where his level was at. He is tough, he is durable. I mean, that was arguably a lot closer than the judges had it. I think on my card, I had it 96-94 to McKean, you know, or you could have given it a draw. But there were a lot of people that came to that post-fight video and said that Kiki Leutele was robbed, that he should have got the decision. And I think, you know, a lot of those were New Zealand fight fans, so maybe they did have, you know, one eye towards Kiki Leutele and everything he was doing in that fight. But it was a case that it was a very hard night's work for Dempsey-McKean. So I think that Justis Huni, you know, this is a big stage, a big opportunity for him to show his wares, because Myris Bradis and Jai Opetaia, that's got to be a fight that is broadcast around the world, is going to have some eyeballs, and it's a showcase for Justis Huni to show where he's at. And I think Kiki Leutele is that sort of perfect resume builder for him to actually show his wares, and especially after the inactivity, the injury, the illness, good to see him back and see where he's at. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.